Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing great this morning. It is 6:30 a.m. here in California, but honestly, I couldn't be happier to be here with all of you. I'm really excited to see the diversity of attendees here today. We actually have almost 200 people registered, from material companies to brands to investors to scientists. Each of you is playing a critical role in transforming the materials industry, and this conference gives us a chance to learn from each other, collaborate to solve some of the world's most pressing problems, from climate change to environmental degradation to plastic pollution and animal cruelty. First, I think it's important for us to align on the terminology that we use in the industry. So I'm sure you've seen on our website and on the conference materials that we use the term next-gen materials. We define next-gen as environmentally preferable and animal-free. So most people ask us, what do we mean by environmentally preferable? And for that, we actually take a very pragmatic approach. This definition is going to change over time. So if you read our reports and you attend our events, you will know that we continuously push two themes: progress over perfection and innovation takes time. So we need to be constantly improving our environmental impact in all areas, and innovation will get us there. But we won't be able to jump from current materials to completely circular materials within a few years or even within a decade. We will need to take steps to improve, and we will need to support those scientists, material companies, and brands who are making those steps and constantly improving. So our recommendations to everyone who's trying to figure out how to define your own environmentally preferred is: first, invest in the material companies, new technologies, and teams which have shown improvement and show a recognition that their materials are not perfect, but they have a plan to improve. And then constantly look at improving your material offerings every year. Pledge to do better every year than you did last year. I also want to address why our definition of next-gen materials includes animal-free. First, consumers care and are continuing to learn more about how animals are treated, and they don't want to participate in that cruelty. But also, you get more sentimental here. When I look at the world and the world I want to help create, I see one in which we all care about the planet on which we live, and we care about our fellow inhabitants. I want to see a world in which all animals are able to live in their natural habitats, engage in their natural behaviors, and own their own lives. That doesn't happen when we continue to use them for our fashion cars and homes. If we hope to make deep change towards a more sustainable materials industry, we need next-gen materials that don't use animals and are environmentally preferred. So I hope this isn't your first introduction to us, but in case it is, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Material Innovation Initiative. We are here to accelerate this progress in next-gen materials. We are a nonprofit ecosystem builder with a strong team of industry professionals who are here to serve all players necessary to develop next-gen materials. I want to introduce you to a few of our team members that you'll see throughout this conference. And if we're working on something that might be helpful to you, please reach out. You can find us in the networking section of the Hopin platform or on our website. So our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Sydney Gladman, has a PhD from Harvard in Material Science and Engineering and 6 years of experience in Exponent's Materials Division. Sydney is working on identifying white spaces for scientific research, encouraging more scientists to focus on next-gen material development, supporting R&D at next-gen material companies, and helping brands and investors understand the science and technology behind these innovations. You'll also meet Tamsin Dolan, our Director of Materials Innovation and Design. She's been a designer in the fashion industry for 25 years. In addition to founding her own line, she worked for Ralph Lauren, Banana Republic, Marc by Marc Jacobs, Armani Exchange, and others, where she held directorial and VP roles. Thomasine works with brands to help them understand the industry, materials, and help them source next-gen materials which meet their needs. She also advises material companies on the aesthetic and performance needs for materials and helps them in navigating how to work with fashion brands. And finally, Ranjani Theragauda, our environmental data scientist, is leading our education and collaboration efforts in environmental assessments of next-gen materials to ensure the industry has the necessary data to make informed decisions when choosing new materials. All of these team members' jobs are necessary for massive transformative industry change. And again, please reach out to us if you think we can help. So I want to address why I believe we're all here at this conference. We care about the environment. Maybe some of us share my views and care about not harming animals. And we believe in the power of the markets to affect positive change. As I mentioned earlier, we define next-gen materials as environmentally preferred and don't use animals. And for the fashion industry, around 3/4 of a company's environmental impact comes from their choice of raw materials. So if you want to reduce your environmental impact, focusing on reducing the impact of your raw materials is a really great place to start. Second, according to the United Nations, industrial animal farming is a leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, land degradation, eutrophication, and of course, animal cruelty. Animal-derived materials rank among the worst for water use, eutrophication, and greenhouse gas emissions. And then when looking at alternatives like the synthetics, polyester, acrylic, these materials were designed to replace these animal materials, but they're petrochemical derived, they emit microfibers into the environment, and we have very few options at the end of life. We actually published a paper on our website showing the effect of microfibers on the environment and animals. They are ubiquitous. They are in every waterway in the world. They're in our air. We can't get away from them. And 30% of these microfibers come from textiles. I actually learned a lot when we did the research for that report, and I encourage you to check it out and read the other reports on our website. So the materials we have right now, which is why we're here, are not working, right? They're not good for the environment. They're not good for animals. And most that are on the market right now are not meeting the performance aesthetic needs of the brands and consumers. And so many of the speakers and attendees of this conference are working to create materials that are fundamentally better than the materials of the past. They're leveraging the technological innovation and untapped natural inputs to solve these enormous environmental challenges and the economic vulnerabilities facing the materials industry. I really do believe that once these materials are affordable and accessible, we will witness a total sea industry change. The reason I believe that is that consumers are giving every indication that they want next-gen materials. Actually, just last week, and you can find this on our website too, we published new consumer research showing high demand for US consumers with next-gen materials. Nearly all survey participants, that was 92%, state that they were open to purchasing next-gen materials. And 41% were very or extremely likely to purchase. That's really huge. I've been doing a lot of consumer research in my career, and those are very high numbers. Even more exciting is that 78% of all the participants were willing to pay the same or more for next-gen materials compared to conventional materials. We also asked them if they could choose a conventional leather item over a next-gen leather item, which would they choose? And 60% said they would choose the next-gen item. And for those who were choosing next-gen leather, they were motivated to do so because they believed in the quality, sustainability, cost, and animal welfare. For those who chose a conventional animal-based leather, they did so because they didn't have experience with next-gen leather and were concerned about the quality. So I think the message for all of us there is when we put next-gen materials on the market, we really need to do so with high quality items. Our recommendation is always not to sacrifice on quality. That will have potentially negative impacts on your brands. So really make sure that you're putting high quality products on the market. So we are at a point where there's significant demand for next-gen materials, but not enough supply. I'm really excited about this conference for that reason, because we have the opportunity to bring together all of the key players to discuss these challenges and shine light on the path forward. I do believe that everybody here is critical to this change. We have cell cultivation experts, mechanical engineers, synthetic biologists, manufacturers, brands, investors, all here with the goal of developing and commercializing more sustainable materials for the market. We all know that we're facing potentially dire results from climate change, and this is not the time to take it slow. We need significant investments, partnerships, and more material companies and scientists tackling these issues facing the industry. Now is the time to embrace sustainable innovation, both to create a livable future on Earth and create a prosperous future for the materials and fashion industry. We need to make the sustainable option the default option. So hopefully that's a little bit inspiring. I did want to go over a few housekeeping items. So you are all on the main stage right now. You should see on the left of your screen areas for networking, an expo, and replay. When we have breaks or during our networking sessions, I recommend you go to the networking area where you can meet with your fellow attendees. You can set up one-on-one meetings. You can get contact information. And then please visit the expo booths where our partners have shared information about their materials. Here you can learn more about specific next-gen materials and set up meetings with the companies. We are also recording all sessions, and they will be available in the replay section very shortly after each session, within a few hours. And as long as you keep your conference link, you can access these recordings for 6 months after the conference. So now I'm really excited to introduce our next panel. I'm going to actually just take a quick break to reset the video, and then I will be back in a second to introduce our moving the needle presentation. All right, thank you.
How are you?
Good. Oh, your background is beautiful.
Oh, yes, the sun is out in London, a rare occasion.
I know, I just had to move I realized I had a lot of sun in my background. So thank you so much for joining us for the Moving the Needle, how to get next-gen materials to market. So Sarah Kent, I hope most people here know who you are, the Chief Sustainability Correspondent for Business of Fashion. And Sarah, again, thank you so much for everything you do in highlighting the sustainability issues in the industry. You are definitely one of my favorite reporters in the field. I love how detail-oriented you are. Obviously, we are big into data here. And I really think you do an amazing job, and I'm really honored to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for that amazing introduction, and thank you for having me and also setting up this session so amazingly. I really think you've just teed this up perfectly, contextualizing why it matters that we figure out how to get next gen materials to market. And I think it's a really interesting discussion to be having at this moment in time, because as you outlined, there's huge demand for these materials. People want them for a variety of reasons. We know that a lot of the materials that we use today all the time aren't good for the environment, and they don't reflect the preferences of a growing number of consumers who want products that are sustainable and ethical. And we know that there's been a huge amount of excitement over new materials and innovations, but that early exuberance has been pretty slow to translate into products on the shelf at a quality that would match what consumers expect. And I think what is increasingly clear is that however transformative a technology may be, getting that tech from the lab to the market is complicated and time consuming and costly. And it requires companies to work in ways that they aren't necessarily used to working in. So I think this session is going to be really interesting because we've got a group of people who are really involved in this day to day, dealing with these issues and figuring out ways forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce the panel.
Please do. I'll be watching from backstage, and I'm really excited to learn from this as well.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. So joining me today is Christine Hall, who is the Senior Designer for Material Innovation at the sportswear label New Balance. Lauren Bartley, that is not Lauren, this is Lauren. Lauren Bartley, who is Sustainability and CSR Director at the Danish brand GANNI. Onur Eren, who just joined a little bit for Lauren just now, who is the co-founder of biomaterials startup Gozen Bioworks. And Alan Lugo, who I think is just joining us now, who is the product strategy manager at Natural Fiber Welding, which is a next-gen materials business. So I know that was the briefest of introductions, but there's a lot to discuss, and I want to get into the conversation. And I think probably GANNI and New Balance need no further introduction. And possibly for this audience, the same goes for NFW and Gozen Bioworks. But I do want to start by asking, Alan and Onur to just give us a really brief elevator pitch overview of, the materials NFW and Gozen Bioworks respectively are developing and sort of the stage at which your businesses are at, just to contextualize the conversation a little bit. And maybe Onur, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me. I am Onur, co-founder of Gozen Bioworks, joining from San Francisco. Gozen Bioworks is an SF-based next-gen material company, and we are inventing next-gen high-performance materials. Our first product is Gozen, which is a next-gen bioleather with high performance, where we are producing the material from bacterial nanocellulose. Our focus is on developing high performance with superior touch and feel, where consumers and brands do not need to select either performance or sustainability. We are trying to gather both aspects of next-gen materials together with high performance.
Right, and so it's a bacterial-based technology that you're using to develop that bioleather. And Alan, I know you're doing, and Alan, I know NFW is doing something slightly different. So do you want to just briefly outline the materials you're developing?
Yeah, certainly. At NFW, we produce 100% bio-based materials. We use, only natural ingredients, whether that's plant matter or minerals, and we use them to create, different types of materials. So we create the Mira material, which is a complement to leather, a replacement for synthetic leather. And we also have our pliant molded rubber outsole material. So, to my knowledge, there's always new things, but those are some of the only, if not the only 100% bio-based solutions in those arenas. And we also have our fiber welding technology, which is Claris, which allows us to sort of give enhanced performance properties to natural fibers, which again allow them to sort of perform at the level of synthetic fibers. And then we always have things in our R&D, on our website, we have, pictures and some documentation around this product called Tunera, which is a 100% bio-based foam. But our approach is always to start well, stay clean throughout the manufacturing process, and then end well. So we put just as much emphasis on what happens to these materials at end of life as we do is developing them, to solve problems in multiple industries.
Great. So I think we're less than 5 minutes in, and we've already heard about two very different technologies looking to solve this challenge for the industry, which I think gives you a sense of the scope of potential here. But Christine and Lauren, I believe you've both worked with NFW directly to develop products. Maybe we could start by, breaking down what that process is like, just to sort of situate this conversation in quite tangible experience. Maybe Christine, you could start, operating from a pretty big company's perspective. What was the process like, starting to work with a new material like Mirum, and how did that work?
Yeah, this is great. And thank you so much, Sarah. I'm super excited to be part of this panel. I watched virtually last year. And so this is quite meaningful for me to be on the panel this year. So I'm super excited. And Alan's been a fantastic partner. But to just give a little bit of history, we were in contact with NFW, I want to say like 6 years ago. And that was kind of our initial 6 or 7 years ago. That was our initial kind of first conversation. It was really about understanding what their vision was, and how it could align with New Balance, what performance benefits we could see down the road. So very, very early on. I think where they were then, and then fast forward a few years, we engaged with them again, and now it's more about helping develop those materials together as a partner, and really making change at scale, hopefully eventually, right? So we're challenged with quite a few things around that. One is cost, one is performance, one is that we have a very robust supply chain that is an extension of our family that we've worked with for a long time. And so bringing on a new partner like this is really a big deal for us. And I think one of the first times that we've really announced that partnership, in a press release, I don't know, maybe it's been a couple years now, Alan. But so how it's kind of worked out from that first visit is we've put together a statement of work, and we've been working with natural fiber welding to get the materials to a place where I can't really say too much, but we'll be in our product. And so because of where they're at and in terms of what's being replaced, they're a little bit different materials, right? Just in terms of, we're looking to replace synthetics, or we're looking to replace leather, for instance. And leather is somewhat of a superior material. It has, strength and qualities that it's really hard to engineer. And so taking that into consideration, we have to figure out the best places that we can bring in new materials like natural fiber welding, that, is consumer facing. Those consumers really value that. They're going to, just like what Nicole said in her kickoff, where, there's consumers that will purchase into that type of material, into that type of product. I don't think everybody's ready for that. And so we, it's kind of like a small start, and hopefully to have a large impact eventually.
So it's been a 6-year process to get to this point where you're just on the cusp of being able to introduce this product to market. What convinced you to invest that amount of time and effort in NFW's material?
Well, I think, for NFW, they're really set up. We believe in their vision, and we believe that they have the expertise on hand to get there. There's a certain trust that's been developed through our working relationship, and that's really been a key component. On the outside of that, we know we have, if you go to our website, we have goals around materials like recycled content and cotton and LWG in terms of leather. But from a sustainable innovation perspective, we know that, the future isn't just that, and that we need to look at other solutions that are less impactful, that address microplastics, that address, chemistries and how we're, that end of life as well. So these are things from a sustainable innovation perspective that we really are in charge to look after.
I think you've raised a lot of very big themes that we will come back to in the discussion, but I also want to, turn to Lauren, and, Lauren, you're kind of approaching this from a slightly different perspective. GANNI is a much smaller independent company, and maybe doesn't, investing 6 years in developing a partnership might sound quite daunting. How do you as a much smaller brand approach this?
Yeah, I think a lot of similarities to what Christine said, but also in a way a lot of differences, because GANNI is a fashion brand, and whereas New Balance is more technical footwear. So we don't have necessarily the same criteria when launching something on the market. So the way that we've approached it was back in 2019, we set up a program called Fabrics of the Future, which was designed to scan the market for these new innovations that will replace materials as we know them today. But our driving force and driving focus was actually to phase out virgin leather, because a lot of our decision making is based on the carbon impact, and we know at GANNI that leather is the highest contributor to that. So that's sort of like how we've approached it. But we're in a very fortunate position where we can work with the innovators and pilot something on a very small scale. So that could be 30 to 60 pieces launched in one market just to test and see the consumer reaction, and then go from there. So I'd say that's like the key difference to what Christine was saying.
So it's being able to take a more iterative approach. And Alan and Onur, I'm curious, we've obviously heard this from a brand perspective as to what they're looking for. And the bar is quite high, actually. From a materials company perspective, how have you found the process? And I think, Onur, you guys are maybe at a slightly earlier stage, so maybe are thinking about this as it's something in the future and how you'll approach it, rather than something with direct experience at the moment. But what do you see as the challenges in terms of working with brands from your side? And maybe Alan, you can tackle that first.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, right? And I think there's different ones when you work with the really large brands, largest brands in the world, than there is working for the very small brands. And some of them is just communication and how that brand is set up to try to sort of intake these new ideas or new materials. Some brands have an innovation team that is maybe very mature. And so that innovation team has lived within that brand organization for, a decade, and they know how to work things through the pipeline to work them to an inline material. Some brands don't have that, or it's a very new team, or you come in through the materials team and not the innovation team. And so there you spend a lot of time just doing lab tests and, looking at numbers on a chart. Did this material pass this test compared to what our standard is? And you get kind of caught up in that, which is valuable as well. It's meaningful work to be done. And then there's other brands that maybe are very small, and you're just working directly with the design director, or directly with the founder or the development director. And then, those ones maybe can go really fast, really soon. And then you get, maybe into wear test within, a couple of months. Whereas some other brands, we might not get to a wear test for a year, because there's just different challenges and different sort of, hoops you have to jump through. And then, a big part of NFW, because we have, I would say, such a rich story around what we do and what we deliver, a lot of times too, we work with those teams to sort of figure out, what is the most valuable, thing that our materials are bringing, internally to your company. Is it a reduction in carbon footprint? Is it an increase in bio content? Is it because, you have this mandate to use less leather or reduce your water consumption? All these different things that we try to figure out, like, well, what's even the right angle? Because, we find the teams that reach out to us from brands or the individuals, usually either they've already kind of been sold on what our outlook is, our approach, or they sort of become sold after they speak to us a couple times. But really then the challenge becomes like, okay, how do we work with, Lauren or Christine or other people at brands to then work as a team to sort of find the best way to use the materials internally. Because, you know, Christine can't just put a material in a shoe and tell New Balance to go make 1 million pairs. There's a lot of other things that have to happen before, you know, you can be in commercial product with these brands, even though you might be engaged with their innovation team.
Do you find that brands ever want exclusivity, and is that a benefit or something to be avoided?
I think we don't get a lot of that, honestly. I mean, there's some that do, and we have done some exclusivity agreements with brands, but for us, it has to be, you know, really, really meaningful and something that I would say allows us to move forward faster and not necessarily slower, right? So sometimes we might do things like that. It will be because we think we have a really committed partner, and it may even allow us to focus resources to move faster with one partner versus, you know, working with 15 partners looking to drive something forward. But I would say as a general response to that question, I would say we kind of shy away from the exclusivity because in many cases, it can be just sort of holding progress back. And maybe if somebody just wants, you know, to own something, but they may not be fully committed to it, then we don't want to sort of hold back that material if they're not going to sort of have this large impact that we would otherwise if it wasn't exclusive.
Got it. And so Onur, I know you're, you know, Gozen Bioworks at a slightly earlier stage of development. You know, having heard Alan just talk about, you know, NFW's experience, how are you thinking about when the right time is to start engaging with brands and how you want to approach that?
So first of all, a little more background on Gozen Bioworks. We are backed by SOSV last year, and we built our pilot production facility in Istanbul. So we started to engage with brands and started to explore different collaboration opportunities with the current capacity within our pilot production facility. And I agree with Alan. I believe that, and what we are seeing today while collaborating the early adapter of brands for our material, there is a learning curve for both parties. So from our perspective, obviously, we focus heavily on understanding the needs and challenges on the brand side. And we are trying to figure out what is the underlying real value of our material for this specific partner. So we are more following a curated approach where we value quality over quantity. So we are also flexible working with different partners, maybe exploring exclusive material opportunities as our core technology allows us to simply fine-tune the finishing of our material based on our future clients' interest. Therefore, so I think I would say first, we should all be mindful that there is a learning curve where both parties need to support each other for the development, like to get to the market. And also, I think from an early stage startup perspective, it's also challenging to navigate across the corporate departments. Like sometimes companies have different departments engaging in the process, so it also takes some time for from a startup perspective to figure out which partner is the right go-to partner. And also lastly, I think that brands should simply decrease the entry barrier for next-gen material companies to be able to work with them. So I feel like once brands be more supportive on prototyping projects, for instance, once they open up themselves for early stage next gen materials, I think there will be more value to unlock from both perspectives, and ultimately, the more successful collaborations we build with brands, the better for the end consumers and for the environment will be. So therefore, on our perspective, we are trying hard to do our best to explore all the collaboration opportunities while being flexible with our offerings and also with the resources we allocate for each partner.
Break down for us a little more what those barriers you see from the brand perspective that should, you say should come down a little bit? What would you like to see?
So I feel like brands can invest more on the material, so that if once we have only one type of goal, or once we see from brands that they are kind of narrow-minded on how to utilize our material, then it is not easy to proceed further. But like next-gen material companies are frontier tech companies. Like we have we are heavily invested in science R&D. Therefore, especially from an early stage startup perspective, we are also exploring different ways to support those partners. So like, for instance, currently we only have one offering, like a next-gen ladder. But I believe there are many ways for a next-gen material company and brand, like a corporate company, to work together. Therefore, I believe that brands should simply evaluate the materials in a way that how they can also support the next-gen material to proceed, because it's not only for next-gen materials job to make it happen. It should be a collaboration, and this is how we are going to make this happen. Otherwise, like, next-gen materials can work on their side and brands can work on their side, but if we cannot build the bridge between, then we are not going to be successful. So we are very mindful. Therefore, we try hard to be flexible, and we expect the same flexibility from brands too.
So brands want a plug and play, but that isn't the way it's going to work with a new material.
I mean, it is fair to expect that. I agree, but maybe we still just have like more time to get there. So during this period, I expect brands to own a more collaborative approach. Obviously, both sides will do their best to become successful, but I think we all need to collaborate to get there first. This is what we should be mindful about.
Christine and Lauren, not to make you speak for all brands in the industry, but do you want to respond to that? I feel like both of you do take that element of collaborative approach, but I'm curious to hear why you think that's hard and we don't see more of it.
Yeah, sure. I can kind of head first. Thank you, Onur, for your honesty and your willingness to also partner with the brand. So, from our perspective, this is kind of how it works, and being mindful that we don't have like a robust resource. But generally, when we talk to startups that are really just like at pilot scale, they're making minimal amounts of material. We'll get those materials in hand. We'll have kind of a first meeting. We'll get those materials in hand, and we'll just kind of do that hand test. And for footwear, if it doesn't pass the hand test, it makes it a little challenging to start to make product out of it, because most likely it's not going to be able to go through the manufacturing process, because that involves heat and tension and all the kinds of things when making footwear. But what we try to do is to engage with the startup, assuming like the relationship seems right? Your expertise is transparent. You're being honest at where you're at in the process. And so we want to help you as much as we can, but we are a little bit limited in terms of like actually putting shoes out that aren't necessarily ready yet for our consumers. And so we'll work with you to help educate you on, we'll do testing of those materials. We'll help support in that way. And then as the material gets better, we can start to do prototypes and give you insights in terms of like, what are the challenges from a manufacturing perspective. So we try to partner in that way, kind of on an early start. And it really depends on the startup and just kind of like how the relationship kind of goes and the potential of the scalability. We're a global company too. So all of our manufacturing locations are in, we have manufacturing in the US, manufacturing in the UK, and in Asia. And that's actually pretty helpful because there's a lot of innovators all over the world that we can tap into those localized areas, which is really the ideal scenario for material procurement and manufacturing. But yeah, that's kind of what we try to do. That's kind of what we've tried to do. So I haven't talked to you, so we should talk after this.
Love it. Connections on stage. Lauren, I want to give you a chance to jump in here as well.
Yeah, I think we don't really ever look for a plug and play solution, because I think we also now have enough experience in knowing that's not really realistic. But for us, I think what we are like less about the practical side, but more about what we value is also transparency. So we're less concerned about where you are right now, but also we're more concerned with where you are heading to be in the future. So if the bio-based content of your fabric is pretty low right now, is the ambition to increase it? Is it possible to increase it? And how can we work together? And then at the same side, like we would then share our expectations of what we're actually looking for. So for an example, okay, like specific like performance requirements, or actually it's this specific shoe that we make that's currently in leather that we need to transition out of it, and can we make it work? So I think, yeah, we have also learned to be really collaborative in the process. And honestly, a lot of it is through like transparency on where you actually are as an innovator versus like what our needs and priorities are as a brand.
I think that's a really interesting point. And, I think it's interesting that you raised transparency, and Christine, you sort of mentioned the words trust and honesty several times as well. To what extent do you find that you're having to spend a lot of time understanding where companies are really at? Is that a challenge, or?
I real quick answer to that is I think in the past it has been. I think it's easier now as more startups are showing up, as more events like this are happening, as more collaboration is occurring, where we all just need to find solutions. We need to move forward. And so the sooner we can understand where you're at, and there's greater resources, I think, to help startups as well. But yeah, I think maybe because I've seen quite a lot, and I think it's just kind of gotten easier to know where someone might be at.
Comes with experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this also touches on a broader conversation that I think is worth having briefly here, but I know we'll have its own session, which is around, what are the metrics brands are looking at to understand whether a material is right for them. If it's about impact, what information evidence do you want? And from Alan and Onur's perspective, how difficult is that to deliver as a startup if you're being asked, for instance, to produce LCAs for a material that is just in the earliest stages of development? What is the happy medium we can find here that works for brands and works for next gen materials companies? And I don't know if any of you feel passionately about that question and want to jump in first.
I could jump in on that, I guess. I mean, I think there's middle grounds and a couple of things you mentioned there. So, at NFW, we did a LCA on Mirum in its current form, and we've always told people we intend to do more LCAs when we continue to make our production process more efficient and should improve the LCA. But some of our other materials, we don't have an LCA yet, and a lot of people always ask for it, and it comes up sometimes in this discussion that says, well, rightfully so in some cases, some of these brands, their strongest way to sort of pitch a new material to leadership is to be able to quantify carbon reduction. So we feel confident that our materials can do that, but also like there just isn't always money to be running 5-6 different LCAs, and then there's different variations of the materials and things like that. So especially some of the big brands, we may talk to them more and say, hey, we'll definitely open if you want to help commission an LCA. That's a good use. It's a very good use of funds. I used to work at a large brand, and I would say, it's probably more useful than working on 5 or 6 projects that will end up failing anyways. It's like there's a failure rate built into the line building process. So, there needs to be some middle ground there as well to help, because, I think Onur said, the startups and the new material companies are spending so much resources on R&D and creating these things. And so then, LCAs are not inexpensive. The other side is the attributes or the requirements of the materials. So, I always talk about, before I worked at NFW, which has only been about 2.5 years, I spent 13 years working for a large, footwear corporation. And, it becomes apparent that the standards that we have in place at those brands basically are following what's possible based on the synthetic chemistries that have evolved for the last 30, 40 years. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if something is short on this standard or that standard, that you can't still make a really good shoe out of it. A lot of times it only means, well, it isn't performing at the same level that synthetics have performed over time. And so a lot of times we work on that with brands. And that's where I always try to say, like, well, can we get to a wear test? We're not asking you to put the material out in 1 million pairs without proper vetting, but can we get to a wear test to actually prove that this thing in a lab test actually may be a problem when somebody's just wearing a shoe? Because there's a lot of tests we find that are like not good proxies for real life wear. But again, I used to be on the material side, and one of the first things you do is run it through those tests to just get an idea of where it's at and what the areas you might need to look out for. And in many cases, you can look to design around them. I think that's an area that, I think when we talked about plug and play, a lot of times that's what people look to do. And I think because it's efficient, right? And, these footwear brands need to operate really efficient. I mean, it's mind blowing. Christine could speak to it, I'm sure, of how many shoes they crank out every year. And you have to be super efficient to do that. So to look to completely redesign a shoe to work with the strengths and weaknesses of a new material usually is, there's not usually a lot of time for that. But some of the new startups, they take that time, and that's their advantage. They have lots of disadvantages of being tiny and new, but that is their advantage, is they kind of can operate sort of unshackled from what the big brands have to operate based
on. Christine, Lauren, Onur, any response to that or thoughts on the LCA question?
On our end, we are a little early to provide full life cycle analysis of our product, but we are working on a preliminary LCA to also, and we are also communicating very clearly on what our material is simply for the brands. We very well understand that also our point of contact needs to promote the material internally. Therefore, they need to know what it is exactly. So we are being 100% honest and open in terms of supporting our collaboration partner to understand our core technology, our material, what is inside it, and how it is aligned with what they are pursuing within the organization. From metric evaluation, performance evaluation perspective, I want to just add on top of what Ellen said, our founder, Ece, has been working on our material and developing the material for 3 to 4 years, even like we are a young company, but there is a longer time period invested in the material development for our first material, xylosan. And we have always known that the performance will be crucial for us to be successful in the industry. Therefore, we worked very hard on increasing the tensile strength of our material, where we achieved 50-60 Newton per millimeter square results, which we believe that today is a game changer for our material. Therefore, it got us, and also the brands that we started to talk to, so excited in terms of a next-gen material company can really perform very well while providing a high quality and aesthetics at the same time, because this is very crucial for automotive industry. As Lauren mentioned, from performance perspective, obviously fashion, luxury fashion, there are many requirements, but not really like very high tensile strength. But if you want to put next gen material into a car, then it needs to be able to stay there for minimum 10 years under really like severe conditions, even the auto gets. Therefore, yes, like what I can share, we are heavily investing in making sure that our core technology evolves in a way that we provide very high performance, and also at some point we can start serving the automotive industry too.
So we talked a lot about what companies should be doing, but Lauren and Christine, I'm curious, do you have any red flags, things that, you know, when you start looking to work with innovators, that if you see, you sort of think, oh no, this isn't right, you know, what should companies avoid doing if they want to kind of grow and work with brands?
Well, I mean, just the quick answer to that would be to be completely transparent and where they're at in terms of their process, their capabilities, and their expertise. I think sometimes there's a caveat there, just in terms of like selling, right, and kind of, you know, making it shiny, because you need to make it shiny to sell it. But then there's maybe selling it too hard in a way, and maybe that would be a red flag for sure. Like, I think you know, the question earlier too, just in terms of the LCA and evaluating the materials, I think where I'm at now with a lot of the next gen materials and new materials that are inherently better than, you know, maybe some of our plastic counterparts, is that none of them are drop-in solutions totally, right? They're new materials, and we really need to figure out ways to bring newness to them, and the value of that newness needs to be expanded upon when I think startups are selling the materials to brands and to people. And the reason I say that in part is because, so we have a supply base that every season they provide us with new materials. Now, these aren't necessarily new materials, but they're new looking. And so with a lot of these materials that are just drop-in, that have the same tumble as a leather that I've seen 1,000 times, the value of that is in part evaluated on a historical bias that doesn't help the material get sold in. And so there needs to be just something special beyond what we've built our products on. And so I definitely wanted to mention that when it comes to the LCA, and you asked about hot spots or areas where you're like, this is a red flag. It's in some conversations we've had, like like natural materials, their natural, the natural properties of natural materials are generally like they're water sensitive. So with some suppliers that we've talked to, or startups that we've talked to, you know, when we talk about water and how water changes those properties, and rubber aside, because rubber is kind of hydrophobic, but when we talk about water and how it impacts that material, sometimes they're not totally straightforward about, like, yes, it will. And so when I talk to a startup and they say, oh, it's completely hydrophobic and water is not going to change any of the physical properties and it's going to be amazing, I kind of like, I don't know. Like, can we just figure out how to make it amazing instead of try to sell the fact that it's not totally there yet? So yeah, that's one of my little pet peeves, is around probably the water thing. But
so lean into your differences and strengths rather than trying to replicate something that it will be difficult to compete with.
Yeah.
Lauren,
Absolutely.
do you have any perspective to add on that?
Yeah, I think similar. I think, like to simplify it, I guess it's over-promising and under-delivering is a big one. And then, yeah, not being transparent on the roadmap of where you are now versus where you want to be. And I think, you know, to Alan's point earlier, like, it is very collaborative because we actually both need each other. We really need these innovators and they really need us. And so we need to create like a safe space to have this conversation and work together collaboratively. And when it comes to things like LCAs, I guess we're less strict because we're not trying to position these next gen materials as better than the previous one right now. We're trying to position it as something new, not a replacement. And we also understand that a lot of these innovators are startups that need investment and funding. And why would you invest in the LCA if you know that you're going to do 6 iterations of the material? And we probably also want you to do 6 iterations of the material to make it better. So I think there's something around managing expectations there, but that can only really happen once we've like fostered a feeling of like safety and trust within each other.
Let's talk a bit more about money, because I think that is a very big part of this conversation. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone watching, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat, and we will try and get to them too. We really want to hear from you, and I'm sure everyone watching along will have their own interests and things that they want to know more about. So let us know what they are, and we can discuss those as well. But so Lauren, you raised a very good point about investment and where money should go. And Onur, I think you also raised the question about who should be spending money on what. For instance, prototyping, who should pay for that? How challenging is it to have these conversations about who in this sort of negotiation should pay for things like prototyping? And for next gen material companies at the moment, you know, the economic environment has changed a lot in the last 18 months. Have those conversations got harder, and has it become more difficult to finance all of the development yourselves without asking the brands for support? And I see you nodding, so I'm going to go to you first with that.
I was thinking a couple of angles to actually provide the whole overview on how we are doing with money. So first of all, I would like to share here first time with our valued audience and with you as well. We closed our seed fundraising round recently, which we will be sharing more details soon. But in terms of financing, obviously it's a very hard environment to get the commitment of investors first for what we are building, especially if you are building a next gen material company, where it's hard. It's hard. Like what we are doing is really hard. It's not easy. I think also like for any other, maybe potential company founders out there, this is super hard. You gotta work really hard, and therefore, from in such an environment when the market is down, you are trying to fundraise. So, but happily we managed to do that, and therefore we are very well financed now to have a very long runway for our company. So back to your point on which party should spend money to make the collaboration happen. So I think that's a very good question in terms of also helping startups to navigate through. How we approach this is, first of all, we believe that both sides should simply be like take an action towards the same point. For instance, like if startups for prototyping, if startups are providing material, then it should be maybe at a discount for the brands to use the material to prototype. Or if there is a cost attached to a prototyping process, maybe like both startups and brands can share. Because as I mentioned previously, I think that this is a way to go together. Therefore, like the cost shouldn't be a blocker for both parties to navigate. This is how we approach this topic. And obviously, brands should support startups. This is I have to say this, but in reality, we are aware that yeah, like otherwise, it wouldn't be a fair point. But in reality, it's not gonna work like that. We know it. Therefore, like on our cases, for instance, there were some tests requested by brands, and we paid for the tests, but we charged for the material that we shipped over for prototyping. So therefore, like, I think back to Kristen's and Lauren's point, being open, being honest, building really trusted relationships, and simply tell what you need to do and what you can put to the table. I think it's the easiest way for everyone to make business.
Alan, do you have additional perspective on that?
Yeah, I can maybe speak to it from a different point of view too, which is like there's this, there's money that comes in from brands or partners, or you could call them customers, right, of the next gen materials. But then there's funding, right? And there's very few brands that actually invest in companies. Some do, right? But if you look at all the funding to all these next gen materials, like, small percentage of it is actually from brands. And, NFW doesn't need that from brands necessarily. What we really need is adoption, or even just, to really break it down is like, if a large brand can say, hey, we like this material, we like what it delivers, it solves a lot of problems for us, and we think it's exceptional compared to its peers, but maybe we can't buy 1 million square feet right now. Okay, that's fine. But if you're doing all those other things, if it's meeting those, what we really look for is to say, like, well, tell us then if the price is what's standing in the way. What price could we be at to unlock a certain amount of volume? Or if even the price is workable, but there's just one physical requirement that your brand has to have to scale. Or maybe it's that, look, we just can't scale. We can't make 1 million pairs if the material has to be shipped from the USA. So if we could get sort of like these, I don't even want to call them commitments, but sort of like if you think about a letter of intent or some sort of a statement from brands that we can then take to investors that says, look, I'm not going to throw New Balance under the bus. Let me just say another brand, any other brand, they're willing to use this material at this scale as long as we meet this criteria and this criteria. And then it's on NFW to meet that criteria. But then the pull is already there. So if you're working with an investor, like, this is already there. This pot of gold is there. We have to then achieve these 2 goals. And then now we've gotten to that pot of gold. And that's kind of the connection that's really useful. And that has been really challenging, I would say, in the footwear space. And I think it comes from the fact that, like, usually we're engaging these footwear brands, like I said, from a materials team, an innovation team, or a design team. And the decision for somebody at a brand to say, we would like to use this at a very large volume if it can meet these requirements, usually comes from somewhere with multiple different, opinions informing it. And that's a very difficult thing to get to. Usually the innovation team and the materials team can't give that to us. And it can be very, I was on the brand side as well. It can be very difficult for me to find the person at my company that will write that down on a piece of paper and submit it. Like, just to find that person. And then even if you find them, like, they're going to need people to talk to understand. So this idea of, like, a brand saying, like, if you can reach these things that we need, a minimum viable product, this is how we will commit to this solution. And it's easy to say. And I think if you had the right people in the conversation, it's also relatively easy to do, but it's proven difficult in practice. And that's really the machine that we need to get the funding to give the brands what they want.
It's the challenge of internal bureaucracy. And I just wanted to pick up on one thing you mentioned, because I think you're in a relatively small cohort of next-gen material companies that are in a position to scale and offer brands the opportunity to make, products at volume. You mentioned that manufacturing in the US was a barrier for some brands. Why is that? Just because it adds transport costs to take it to where a product is being manufactured?
Yeah, transport cost and lead time, so again, when we say plug and play, sometimes we just think about, like, oh, I want to put this material in this existing shoe. But really the challenges of plug and play is that the factory is used to making materials that arrive in 30 days. And so then, if you're making something in the United States that has to go to Southeast Asia, well, you can't ship it by sea and deliver it in 30 days. Now you have to air freight. Okay, so now you have the cost that goes up. So, those, I mean, it's a complex thing, but really like lead time and shipping cost, really can throw a wrench. Even if you have all the other things solved, lead time, I'm sure Christine can speak to this. Lead time can kill projects. If materials arrive late, you miss the launch, like it's done.
That's a super interesting point. I think something that will be valuable for a lot of people to think about. We've got some questions through from the audience that I'm going to turn to in just a moment. But before I do, I kind of wanted to flip this question to Christine and Lauren and sort of say, how challenging is price when it comes to working with next gen materials? They're often more expensive. How big a challenge is that to get buy-in alternatively? Internally to work with them?
Yeah, I would say thus far it's been a bit of a challenge depending on how more expensive it is. Well, I mean, first it's like, well, what do you want to do? If we want to replace an existing material that we have, that we purchase large quantities of, that we have at a really good price, that from a physical properties perspective is really good. It can be manufactured. So like the new materials aren't necessarily a drop-in solution. So cost is a big deal then, because you're paying for something less. And I think that is still kind of like the perception, is that we're paying for something less. And so the priority in terms of like, we built our product in this industrial revolution on materials that are just last too long to begin with. And so, yeah, we really need to shift, and we're struggling with that, to prioritize, sustainability 100%. It's a challenge. That doesn't really talk to cost, but if the cost was comparable and was a drop-in kind of cost, I mean, it'd be a no-brainer, right? To a certain extent. But then we still need to overcome just the qualities, the visual qualities, the physical qualities. So there's quite a few things there. But I think, one thing about GANNI that is really inspiring is that they do these small collections. And I think that's something we're looking at to figure out, because we do that already with our collabs, but we're also trying to figure out like how we can make space here for these next gen and newer materials.
Lauren, I feel like that's a perfect segue over to you to speak to how GANNI approaches this.
Yeah, I think we have luckily built a mindset internally that these next gen materials will be more expensive. But I think, yeah, of course, it still comes up as a conversation, and how the conversation also evolves is that what our teams internally need to see is like, okay, but when will the price come down? Which obviously is dependent on when the innovator can scale and commercialize, which sometimes we as a sustainability team can't always provide those answers, but that is a conversation. But yeah, one way that we then do test it if it will work is to do a small launch to see like, okay, look, like our community is responding super well to this, so we should continue. And it's like that immediate feedback, which then in turn helps reinforce the conversation internally that this is a worthwhile investment and this will pay off over time. But yeah, I would be lying if I said like the price issue wasn't an issue. It definitely is. Luckily, we found a way to work around it. But yeah, we still need to also future-proof and see those costs come down over time.
I think that point about community feedback is really interesting, and also dovetails quite nicely with a question we have from an audience member, Henry Lee, who asks, from a startup perspective, how can you quickly learn about what brands want in terms of properties and to make a material desirable? Are there documents available? Are there brainstorming opportunities? Christine, Lauren, do you have a place on your websites where sort of prospective materials companies can go to understand what you're looking for?
So for us, we do have physical requirements. Those aren't publicly known. So we we generally have a startup sign an NDA before we share some of those requirements. Yeah, I think, you know, you can also go to, I mean, just as a roundabout way to do it, you can also go to trade shows, like material trade shows. There's one on the Northeast. This is more specific to footwear, but talk to people, talk to, you know, material suppliers that are in that business, get a sense of what those potential requirements might be. And that can also help give insights into what the material requirements may be.
Yeah, and then from our side at GANNI, I think the best place to look is our responsibility report, which will tell you exactly what it is that we're looking for, which is leather alternatives and fiber to fiber solutions as well. That's our main priorities, and anything for us is based on reducing our carbon footprint. So also next gen materials that are tackling that aspect is something that's very interesting for us to look at.
Yeah, and then you guys have a pretty comprehensive table that kind of ranks materials in terms of how they fit within what you're looking for as well, which I think could be helpful on this. Another question from Akshay Chowdhury. If next gen materials are able to scale to really start to displace the conventional materials we use today, do you and the panelists think that this is really going to reduce the impact in the world? Like, do we have evidence to show that these materials are better, or are we just buying into buzz? Which I love as a provocative question.
I don't really want to sign into buzz. Go ahead, Onur.
So, I mean, I think it's so if we want to decarbonize the fashion industry, I think it's a fact that we need to switch to next gen materials. Like, it's not going to be only decarbonizing several parts, but material itself is generating like majority part of the emissions. Therefore, I believe that in terms of impact, I assume this environmental impact that we can provide as next gen material industry, it's a 100% yes on my side. I don't like this is why I am also involved in this. I think what we are working on is going to be very successful and hugely impact the environment on the positive side.
Christine, I feel like you were also going to jump in there.
Well, there are some of our suppliers that have next gen materials that have provided LCA data to us. And so we feel confident that in comparison to say traditional leather, in one of those materials, that there's substantial gains in terms of lowering your carbon footprint. So I think it depends on exactly what is the process that you're using to engineer your materials. I don't think that there's full clarity on some of these processes simply because they haven't been fully scaled up. So yeah, I think, kind of like the EVs, right? Electric cars, like we're holding hands on a vision and we want a better future. And so I think we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, sorry, Alan, did I interrupt you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, I mean, I don't think this is a hot take, but I feel like we need to throw it out there, is to say, like, making 22 billion, then 25 billion, then 27 billion, then 30 billion pairs of shoes a year is like just unsustainable, right? So that's a problem. That's a different thing we have to solve for. Maybe that's around like how companies generate revenue and all these kinds of things. But with that being the case, you can look at carbon reduction, but we also, one of the things that NFW really values and looks at is toxicity. It's only, I say it's a matter of time, but it's already here and we've been living with it. Like the amount of toxic things that are in these products that we put on our bodies and bring into our homes and then throw into the ground later. So when I think about like, okay, like if we all use biomaterials or we all use next gen materials, have we solved the toxicity problem? Have we solved sort of like worker safety problem? Have we solved, feedstock issues? So I think that's why when NFW says like, look, when we're trying to scale and we're trying to have a solution that can have a real impact at scale, like that's where we go back to this idea around plant matter and natural materials and minerals. Like, at the scale the industry is working, growing things in labs just won't work. It's a waste of time, to be honest with you. So, these are the things we have to think about when we say like, how are we going to get there? What solutions make sense? And then what problems are we actually, trying to solve, right? It's, sometimes if you just have a goal to say, well, we're going to use more preferred materials, like, well, what's the outcome? Like those are just words in a sentence. What are you actually trying to solve for? Toxicity, carbon reduction, things like that.
I think that was great. And I think also points to some of the complexities here, and also that, there's probably not one single silver bullet solution. There'll be lots of different, we're trying lots of different technologies, and we still need to figure out what's going to work best. And we're trying to solve a lot of very, very big questions, which, dovetails very nicely with a question we have from Marilla Perkins, who asked more positively, are there some genuine next generation material success stories we can point to that show where the industry might be headed? Christine or Lauren, I'm going to get one of you to answer that, because I feel like you're working with this day in, day out, and can speak from the brand perspective.
Yes, I think so. So we have 28 innovations that we're currently working with, and then we were initially meant to be launching 5 per year, but now this year will be around 8. And then we have 6 longer term partnership agreements with next gen materials. So we see extremely positive things, especially for the leather alternative space. And we've also seen some amazing test results that actually shows that some of the leather alternatives that we're testing and prototyping actually outperform the leather version that we had originally, which I think is amazing and something that we're super proud of internally. So yes, I think there are many success stories and more to come.
Can you name check a few?
Yeah, for sure. I think Oho Skin is one that we are like, that's the material that actually is outperforming our leather products right now, which is awesome, which is planning to scale. And we've seen some really good results with Mirum. There's not anything out there publicly yet, but there will be next year. And then we have quite a few with our ready-to-wear products. So the fiber-to-fiber technologies that we were speaking about before. So Infinited Fiber is one of them. Psychora is another one. And yeah, many more to come.
Amazing. Thank you. And Christine, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, when we talk about specifically next-gen materials, I think like Mirum is one that we're looking at to bring into our product. We haven't launched anything yet, but that's definitely something that we're working on. And so other than that, from a next gen, I wish that I could say that there's more success stories. We've looked at, spider instead of like, silk, looking at spider silk or other kind of like a little bit farther out kind of materials there. But really, from the brand's perspective, and in line, we've really been focused on kind of putting all our eggs in a row, so to speak. We have partnered with the Science Based Target Initiative to set our science-based targets, and so that's one very clear focus that the brand is pulling all the goals around to a certain extent. Keeping in mind that, as a sustainable innovation team, looking at just not that carbon lens, but also other materials that, less toxicity, less water, and other I think Alan mentioned it just in terms of toxicity. So I wish there were more success stories around next gen specifically. And I think, as we progress forward, hopefully, advances will come in that area with respect to performance. So like at New Balance, we really were really lean in on craft and quality. And so we have pretty stringent quality requirements, and we do wear tests, and we don't want to put anything on the market that kind of will fall apart. And I've seen it happen with next gen materials, and I think that's I'm mixed actually to doing that to a certain extent. I think it helps promote the material, but then on the other hand, when the material fails, I feel like the reputation gets a little scarred, and it doesn't help then internally to sell that when there might be there might be a product on the market that has failed. And so yeah, I'm hoping that New Balance can provide an opportunity, and when we do release, it's going to be very meaningful to us for sure, and at the quality that we need it to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting and nuanced answer that points to sort of both the hope here, but also the challenges still. And I slightly related to that, we have a question from Taryn Mead, which really I think is for you, Alan and Onur, asking about the investment landscape right now. VC money has generally been more hesitant over the last 18 months. Taryn says she's heard in this space in particular. Has this been your experience, both of you? Onur, I know you said you just raised. What was that like? Do you have a sense of the economic environment being a bit more gloomy?
I would say it wasn't easy, but I think that there are still investors who are focusing on investing in next-gen material space. They are very knowledgeable. They understand the science behind of the product. So I think for every startup to find the right investor to work together, and who has the domain knowledge, but also who can help the startup to go further is the key. In terms of economical perspective, obviously, investors, what we have seen so far, investors are spending more time on their due diligences. So they want to make sure that they don't they complete their due diligence processes, and it takes more time, to be honest. But in our case, it worked well. I would say also, like, startups in this environment should not be discouraged if they hear so many no's. If there is clear value proposition of the product, and if there is a great team behind of it, the investment, I think, will find the startup. Even startup can't find the investment. This is what I experience always. So yeah, this is my take on it.
So the money is there, just perhaps a little more cautious. Alan, you said that NFW is in the happy position of not needing any money at the moment.
Well, I don't think I said that.
Sorry, I paraphrased incorrectly.
We very much would welcome any and all investment. But I think, Sarah, the question, we're raising money, of course. We're still a startup. We're not financially independent. Let me make that clear. The question you answered about the investing climate, I think another factor that's playing into this is that, the reality is there's been a lot of money invested into some of these biosolutions that honestly haven't produced any results. Going back 5, 7, 8, 10 years. And I think that's affecting a lot of the investors too, to say like, well, maybe it isn't all sunshine and rainbows in this biomaterial space, but the reality is there's a lot of people who raised money without really good plans. And without the right people on their team, and without to understand how to be successful in these global markets and multiple industries. So I think that's a really big one too, that is like, if you're one of the people that are still left standing, still making progress, does everybody recognize why that is, versus just looking at this market of biomaterials as a big risk?
Right. So we've exited the era of easier money, but the money is still there. I know this is a huge topic, and we've only just scraped the surface, but unfortunately we're out of time. But Christine, Alan, Lauren, Onur, thank you so much. This has been such a great topic. And with that, I will turn the mic back over to Nicole.
Yes, thank you all so much. I always learn new things in these conferences. I really appreciate all of you joining. Sarah, if you don't mind staying on for a minute, I had some highlights that I thought might be useful to share with everyone. I think it's always sort of important. We're learning a lot, but to pull out lessons learned. Some of the things that I heard, I love what Christine said close to the end, which was a warning about putting products on the market too soon. I actually talk a lot about my experience in the food industry and vegan cheeses. So I don't know if anyone's had experience with vegan cheese. I spent hundreds of dollars with vegan cheese that I bought and literally thrown away. And it hurts the market, right? People will have something, then they'll extrapolate their experience from that into a whole industry. We don't want that to happen with next gen materials. We don't want people to buy bags and have them fall apart or the color to come off on your shirt. It really is important to make sure that those products do meet consumer needs. I also found that partnerships are extremely valuable. I think that was one of the main issues that came out today. Honesty is critical. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. Few materials are plug and play, that it takes time and creativity to work together and get these products to market. Don't always think of next gen materials as replacement materials, but you can think of them as new materials. Price is obviously an issue now, but I didn't hear this in the session, but we do believe that this price will come down over time. I mean, that's what happens with all new innovations. We heard there's a lot of money going into scale, but right, that is going to take time. Maybe there's production facilities in the United States, but not in Asia. So when there's more money invested in the space, that we can get more production and that cost will go down. And then likely there's not one solution. So we hear this a lot from companies asking brands asking what material company should we work with, right? Who's going to be the success? There's a lot of technologies. Which one's going to win? The industry's huge, right? We've got a massive problem with a huge industry to overtake. We need all of these solutions, and there's lots of different performance attributes that are needed, and some technologies might be better for some over than others. So those are my highlights. Was there anything that you learned or you particularly wanted to share?
I think you sort of covered it pretty comprehensively. For me, I thought what was so interesting about the conversation was that, this is really complicated. And I think perhaps what happened when, we first started talking about next generation materials, everyone got very excited because the opportunity is so beguiling and so exciting. You see the solution on the horizon, but we all kind of forgot that to get there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And I think, what the panel unpicked with such nuance was just all of the different elements that we need to be thinking about, and none of it is insurmountable, but it is a bit of a new way of working, I think, for the industry.
No, I think so too. I do love that nuance, and I think that is really critical. So thank you so much again for your willingness to participate and your commitment to sustainability. So right now we are going to take a quick 15-minute break. I know it was a long morning so far. And then we have virtual networking. So what I encourage is during our breaks, everyone visit the sponsor booths because you can learn more about these new innovations in next-gen materials. There's some really great videos showing you development of the materials. And then in the networking session, we'll have a chance to connect one-on-one with other attendees today. You can, set up meetings here. You can connect with them afterwards. Or like you said, Sarah, we're even making connections on stage. That's part of the value of the conference. So you can go to the networking button on the left hand of the screen. So thank you everyone again for joining this morning. And I hope you'll join us this afternoon for our final panel of the day. Thanks, Sarah.